What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Today I'll be going over a handful of players that I am very excited about this coming season. But before we do that, have to start things off with the stat of the day. Last week's stat was last season, 4 quarterbacks had at least 10 passing touchdowns inside the 5-yard line. I said it was Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Josh Allen, and asked you guys who the 4th one was. The answer was not Patrick Mahomes, which many thought it was. It was actually Russell Wilson, and Heat Stars was the first to get that one right. Today's stat, there were 13 wide receivers last season who were aged 24 or younger with over 100 targets. Among them, Justin Jefferson and A.J. Brown ranked first and second in yards per target. Who ranked third? All right, so first player we're going to go over today is Antonio Gibson, and I thought that he was one of the top trade targets early last season, not necessarily midway and close the season. That kind of turned into Swift and Taylor, but to start the season with what we expected him to do midway through and to close the season, he was an exceptional buy low. And I think it is still the case in Dynasty. So I feel like there's a lot of people out there who are like, man, missed the boat on Gibson in Dynasty. I don't think so. I think he is still being undervalued. You can still go after him. And I'm pumped about what he could do this season for a number of reasons. One of them is a touchdown opportunity. And the natural response to that's going to be, Nicky's on Washington. Like, how does that translate in a touchdown opportunity? Well, he was on the same team last season, and he scored 11 rushing touchdowns, despite the football team ranking 25th in points per game. So right there, you're like, okay, he can still do it. And how did he do that? Well, it's because they got so run heavy at the goal line. 19th in carries inside the 20. 15th in carries inside the 10. And 8th in carries inside the 5. And as they move closer, getting more run heavy, you're like, well, why do they do that? It's quarterback play. I mean, look at the list of quarterbacks we talked about in the stat of the day to start, I guess it was last week's video, but when I mentioned it to start this video, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Josh Allen, Russell Wilson. When you've got those guys as your quarterback, it makes complete sense to kind of shift away from the ground game and say, hey, I'm pretty sure Aaron Rodgers can get us 5 yards with him and Devonta Adams. I'm pretty sure Brady can find one of Gronk or Evans or Godwin. And so that gives their running backs maybe a little bit less opportunity if everything else is equal. Now, those offenses are so good in general that they get to the end zone more, and so you still want their running backs for touchdowns. But the point is, even when you have a team that has lower points per game, their running backs can still produce touchdowns if the quarterback is bad, because the coaching staff is going to trust the quarterback less when they get close, leading to a higher percentage of the goal line carries as opposed to targets. And if we look at who's got the goal line job, well, if you exclude week 1, it's absolutely Gibson. Week 1, Peyton Barber has an insane 10 red zone carries, which was infuriating to watch. But he follows that up with 1 in week 4, 2 in week 10, and then 1 in each of weeks 12, 13, and 14, operating as the very clear backup for the rest of the season after week 1. Antonio Gibson won both the early down and the goal line job by week 2 in the NFL. And remember, this is a kid who had 33 carries and 44 receptions in his collegiate career. In both of his only 2 seasons playing football in college, he combined for 33 carries and 44 receptions. I mean, think about that for a second. Like, Gibson comes out of college with just a dominant athletic profile. 6 foot, 230 pounds, runs a sub 4.40, so 99th percentile height adjusted speed. He just has insane production to go along with it when he was used. He scored a touchdown on 18% of his touches in college. He was second to Jamar Chase in 50-plus yards plays in 2019. And like I said, that's despite 77 total touches in college. Like, he was busting off 50-yard plays like it was nothing. But the main question was, how's that going to translate into the NFL? Will he still be a gadget player, or will some team be able to feature him as a running back? And that was the most important thing to me last season, was we got our answer incredibly fast. Geist gets cut. Peterson gets cut. Barber is used for 1 game and then gets relegated to just mop-up duty. Their 3rd round running back, who had minimal experience at the position, was trusted to handle over 200 touches, including goal line and receiving game work, becoming just the 10th rookie running back aged 22 or younger in the last 20 years to post over 1,040 scrimmage yards and 11 or more touchdowns. And think about the competition. I mean, how many running backs are safer than Gibson at this point? Like, running back is not going to be a priority in the draft or free agency for Washington, so he's extremely likely to have very little competition. And imagine the upside. I mean, he was already the running back 13 in points per game from week 2 on, despite 0 games over 65% of the snaps and going over 50% just 5 times. And people want to say, well, he doesn't have any upside because he's on Washington. We've already gone over why he can score a ton of touchdowns. And then we have McKissick get 80 receptions. I mean, imagine even a third of those going over to Gibson. That puts Gibson over 60 with all the goal line and all of the early down work. So unless the football team does something just shocking in the draft or free agency, then there's no reason Gibson can't finish as a top 10 running back. And I'm going to be moving him up the rankings during my next update, which you can see at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. And remember that there's the promo code FFA. And if you use that before May 1st, you're going to get 15% off any package on the site. Next up, we've got a combo of players, and that's both A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones. So 2 names in this one because we have a really unique situation. Like, Aaron Jones is incredibly talented, and his skill set as a player just aligns perfectly with fantasy production. And his potential departure is also a massive boost for A.J. Dillon. The one thing that people are going to mention with Jones is the touchdowns, right? He's got 30 touchdowns over the last 2 seasons, which is relatively unlikely to happen if he changes offense, right? Because like the Packers are just one of the best offenses in the league, and so there's been so many touchdown opportunities. If he goes to a lesser offense that's not scoring as many points, then it's less likely that he's going to score 30 touchdowns. Like, he can still have a good season with touchdowns, but I mean, he's been like the leader in touchdowns for 2 straight seasons. That's less likely to happen. It can still happen. It's just less likely to happen if he goes to a worse offense, and it's not an offense headlined by Aaron Rodgers. So if Jones were to sign with a worse overall offense, then that part of the game potentially is reduced just a little bit. But like I said, he's so fantastic for fantasy because he can score those touchdowns, can get early down, is really good in the receiving game, that he's going to more than make up for it if they're going to feature him in a 3-down role. Because whoever signs him is going to pay a decent amount of money. And right now, honestly, it looks like the front runner is the Dolphins. Again, I'm recording this in early March. Like, we're going to know where he's going. But if he goes to a team like the Dolphins, we're very confident they're just going to feature him. And that's just not something that was the case in Green Bay. Like, he had plenty of games where he was used a lot in total touches, but he was only in on over 75% of the snaps in 3 out of 30 regular season games. That's crazy low. You know, he scored 16.3, 17.8, 24.8 fantasy points in those 3 games. If you give Aaron Jones the snaps, he's going to produce. He is just the type of player that if he's on the field for a significant number of the snaps, he's going to produce in fantasy. That gives him insane upside and an insanely high floor. And since he'll command a lot in free agency, we have to assume that even if it's not the Dolphins, who were like 100% sure would feature him, whoever beats out the Dolphins is going to feature him. No one's going to overpay for a running back and then just not use him, especially in today's landscape of running back. Like, everyone knows at this point that they're just not a position you pay a lot of money to because they don't matter as much to winning. But if a team is willing to do that, they're invested and they're going to use it. And so we look at that and we say, if a team's going to give him a ton of snaps, even if he leaves this insanely good offense of the Packers, he's going to be used so much that he's going to be insane for fantasy. So I'm very excited to finally see him unleashed because it could be incredible. But then we flip over to the Packers and we say, well, okay, well, that's a massive hole that needs to be filled. and they're very unlikely to draft a running back, bring someone else in free agency. So it's down to A.J. Dillon and Jamal Williams. And I do personally think that Dillon is going to beat out Williams, and he would instantly have, 15 to 17 touchdown upside, just like Aaron Jones had. And I mean, Dillon's the type of player that they're more likely to use towards the end zone than Aaron Jones. And he could easily post, over 1,200 total yards on top of that. Like, he looked great in a very, very, very limited workload last season, but he looked really good, and they invested so much draft capital in him that I just find it hard to believe that they would feature Jamal Williams. Like, it just makes so much sense for them to use A.J. Dillon. And I think it's pretty absurd to try and predict the next Derrick Henry. Like, Derrick Henry is such an outlier that, like, he deserves to be in his own tier with just no comparison. So people are definitely going to try and say, oh, maybe he's the next Derrick Henry. I tried to find a better comp because, again, it's just so impossible to predict a Derrick Henry. But what if he had a season like Jay Ajayi in 2016? Not a massive threat in the receiving game, but he had some just monster carry totals in their wins, and the Packers are a team that we expect to win a lot of games. He had a streak of 7 touchdowns in 9 games. So what if Dillon did something like that? He's racking up a ton of touchdowns. He's having ceiling games when they're up pretty big at halftime, pretty big in the third and the fourth quarter, and they're just pounding the rock with him. And teams still need to respect the pass because you've got Devonta Adams and Aaron Rodgers, and so there should be a ton of lanes for him to run. I don't want people to get just too amped that he's going to post like Derrick Henry numbers, see Aaron Jones leaving free agency, start drafting him in like the second and the third round. Like, that'll be very, very aggressive. But assuming his ADP doesn't get too high, and assuming the likely outcome that Aaron Jones leaves, they don't really draft anyone, they don't bring anyone in free agency, he could be a really, really nice mid-round pick that's got a ton of upside that allows you to maybe go with tight end early, take a quarterback early, take some wide receivers early, and still get insane upside in the middle rounds at running back. For our next player, we're going to begin with a stat. Randy Moss did it twice in 1998 and 1999, but since then, only 4 wide receivers have posted over 870 receiving yards and 11 or more touchdowns at age 22 or younger. Allen Robinson, Odell Beckham Jr., Mike Evans, and Chase Claypool. Claypool had just an incredible rookie season, and I was totally wrong about him. I figured that they would for sure have Juju and Deontay ahead of him, and that they would rotate Claypool in, and that he wouldn't really be used all that much in his rookie season. Now, beyond that, I was open to the fact that he could break out. But I thought in his rookie season, like, we had to think Juju and Deontay were operating ahead. And if you're rotating in with James Washington, like how many yards is Big Ben passing for, right? I mean, it better be an insane number if you think that Claypool's going to break out. And honestly, I think that may have been the plan for Pittsburgh. Like, they may have gone into the season thinking, yeah, that's probably what's going to happen. But he just played so well that they couldn't afford to keep him off the field sometimes. His first season feels a lot like A.J. Brown and DK Metcalf to me. Both of those guys had great seasons, but they were a bit up and down, and they were clearly going to expand their target shares moving forward. Brown had 52 receptions, 1,051 yards, and 9 touchdowns on 84 targets. Metcalf, 58 receptions, 900 yards, 7 touchdowns on 100 targets. Well, Claypool, 62 receptions, 873 yards, 11 touchdowns on 109 targets. And the comparison seems to be the strongest with Metcalf, honestly. 9 more targets for Claypool, 4 more receptions for only 27 fewer yards, and 4 more touchdowns. Very, very similar production. And if we look physically, listen, I mean, Metcalf wins in almost every single comparison, but Claypool is an inch taller. He is 10 pounds heavier, and while Metcalf is a tad faster, they both have 99th percentile height-adjusted speed. There's no doubt in my mind that Claypool can have a breakout second season just like DK Metcalf had. The only big thing that's just standing in his way is quarterback play, and really what happens with Juju. Like, what does this starting offense look like? Juju really wants to stay, and he's willing to take a discount. So it still could be Deontay, Juju, Claypool, and Washington. And if Big Ben returns on a discount as well, that is going to limit his ceiling, because no matter how good Claypool is, those other guys are good too. They have a very talented wide receiver core. And Big Ben's not going to throw for 6,000 yards. So something has to give, right? Because Metcalf was really just one of two main receivers with Russell Wilson as his quarterback. So even if the total pass attempts were way lower, that is still the preferred situation to be in. When it's like, hey, it's really only me and Lockett out here, and we've got one of the best quarterbacks in football, it's much easier to break out. But if you've got, a dust quarterback, and there's three other talented wide receivers, it's just much more difficult. So even with that, though, and even with Juju potentially returning, I love the potential upside that Claypool brings, especially if Deontay continues to struggle with drops. Because then we could see a situation where Claypool beats out James Robinson. He's pretty much always on the field because maybe they're rotating Deontay in and out a little bit more than they did last season, and Claypool is just the established number one receiver on the offense. Not necessarily the most targeted, but clearly the top option when they get to the red zone. Being used downfield, being used as a possession receiver, and maybe he has a season where he breaks out just like A.J. Brown and DK Metcalf did in their second seasons. And the final point, honestly, is that Claypool's not going to cost you a third-round pick. Like, we can be really excited about receivers, but then we look at the opportunity cost of taking them. We're like, but there's only a few good running backs left, and Kittle's still on the board, and I could take, Patrick Mahomes. I can take, Dak Prescott. Like, there's just so many other options. But as you kind of leave that range and you get into where Claypool's likely to go, well, now you're like, okay, well, the running backs are garbage. We're starting the garbage tier at tight end. There's a ton of quarterbacks that are the same. The opportunity cost of taking Claypool is now much lower. And the upside is that in 2022, he's a second-round pick because he's got that athletic profile. He's got the production. We've seen that he can score. He could score 15 touchdowns this season. He could combine that with 1,200 yards, and he could be a top 5 wide receiver. Those are the players I'm extremely excited about because I'm not giving up a ton to get him. If he were to somehow start going in the third round, well, we have a different discussion about this. I don't think that's going to happen, and so I'm really excited about him for fantasy this season. So those are a few players I'm excited about this season in fantasy football. If you want a complete list of players that I am targeting, you can check that out at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Sign up for any package before May 1st with the promo code FFA, and you're going to get 15% off. And we will continue doing season-long and dynasty content every single week moving forward, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss out on any of that. But that, my friends, is the end of this one. Hope you all enjoy. If you did, then how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.